Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Tuesday morning, a Rare Tuesday podcast, talking 7 games around the association. Quick reminder before we dive in, please make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button down below. Also, make sure you're heading over to the Twitter machine or my Patreon page and hitting the follow button or signing up for my monthly options available for you over there if you're not already signed up to my daily projections content and Discord and all of that good stuff. I do apologize for the uh, no podcast yesterday. It was only 5 games, but as I mentioned in my Discord channel this week, going to be a little short on the recordings because of some personal stuff going on. But I'm going to do my best to get as many out as possible for you guys. But without further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the games. The first game that we're going to talk about tonight, Washington at Cleveland. Washington 6-point favorites in this one, a 219 over under. We do have Tristan Thompson, David Nwaba, John Wall, Markieff Morris, Dwight Howard, and Kevin Love all out for this game. Of course, they've been out for quite a while. Sam Decker and Jan Mahinmi are questionable for this game. Looking at the Washington side of things, it starts with the backcourt guys. As far as my interest goes, TOMAS, SATORANSKY, and Bradley BEAL are primary options that I'm considering here. The Cavaliers, they rank 30th in defensive efficiency, 2 opposing point guards, allowing 25.9 points, 6.7 rebounds, and 9.6 assists, go along with a 48.7% field goal percentage and 39.1% from 3. They also rank 17th in defensive efficiency, 2 opposing shooting guards. We've seen TOMAS Satoransky play really, really well recently. Obviously, some up and down in his results, but he, of course, has been playing pretty well and in some good and tough matchups against like the Golden State Warriors, things like that. So he's a little bit more of a tournament option, especially at his 6K price tag. He's 6,700 over on FanDuel. Again, more of a tournament option. But he does have triple-double upside. We've seen the rebounding and assist be there for him at times. It's a spot where I do have interest in him. Hasn't really gotten a large sample size against the Cavaliers, but given how bad they are on defense, I definitely think he is someone that I want to get some exposure to. And then Bradley Beal, at this point, it's pretty much futile to continue to talk about Bradley Beal. We know the usage production is going to be there, minutes are going to be there for him. Without John Wall, he is the driving force of this offense, the highest usage on the team. Most nights going to get you 40 plus fantasy points. He's a little bit pricey, especially over on FanDuel where he's 10-1, 9,200, also a little bit pricey. But again, a really, really good matchup here against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I have a lot of interest in him in all formats. As far as the rest of the guys go, we kind of need the status. We kind of need to know if Sam Decker, Jan Mahinmi are going to play before we consider Jeff Green in a revenge game. Green has been coming off, he comes off a pretty strong stretch of games, getting 20 plus fantasy points and 4 straight. The minutes would be a little bit more for him if Sam Decker were to miss this game. Would see most likely 30 plus minutes. And with the Cavs ranking 27th in defensive efficiency to power forwards, I have some interest in him here tonight. Take 60% of his shots at the rim or above the break 3, as we know Cleveland struggles to defend those 2 areas. I do have interest in Trevor Ariza just as a cash option. Cleveland 24th in defensive efficiency to opposing small forwards. We know the minutes are going to be there for him. He's going to play upper 30s, even into the 40s most nights, and this is a spot where he could definitely get on top of his $6,300 salary on DraftKings, $6,600 over on FanDuel. If we see both Jan Mahinmi and Sam Decker miss this game, I would definitely be interested in going back to the well with Thomas Bryant coming in at 5,500 over on DraftKings, 5,500 over on FanDuel. Really need those guys to be out for those minutes to be secure for him. But this is a spot where he could definitely smash if he gets the minutes. And then Otto Porter, a strong tournament option off the bench. On the Cleveland side of things, while this is a pretty favorable matchup for them, what's not favorable is the fact that Larry Drew is basically toying with his rotations, and some nights it's Alec Burks, some nights it's Colin Sexton, some nights it's Jordan Clarkson that are getting the minutes in the backcourt. It has been Alec Burks the last 2 games. Of course, that has probably been because he has just outplayed Colin Sexton, which is obviously not that hard to do. Production has been really, really good for him over the last three, and this is a matchup where I definitely want to get some exposure to the backcourt. He does match up slightly better here, taking 65%, or where with most of his shots coming at the rim or above the break threes. We've seen the Wizards struggle to defend those two areas. They're allowing 66% shooting at the rim, 36.7% shooting on above the break three. So I think it's Alec Burks night once again for me, and he's cheap. He's 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,100 on FanDuel. I'm fine with him in all formats. Looking at Cedi Osman, he's been playing really, really well of late, and that concerns me because we know he's probably going to let us down. He's been terrible in this matchup before, even though it's a really, really good matchup. That being said, the minutes have been solid for him. The field goal attempts have been solid for him. The production has been really solid for him. He's probably the safest option from a minutes perspective. Washington does rank 28th in defensive efficiency to opposing power forwards on the season. Again, he's been really strong. He's been really solid recently. 49% shooting, 36.7% from beyond the arc over his last 10 games. Outside of that, Rodney Hood, always tough to trust, can be used in GPPs. The minutes have been really solid for him. He's 4K on DraftKings, 4,800 on FanDuel. And then onto Zizic. I don't know if Larry Nance is going to start eating into his minutes a little bit more. We've seen Nance the last two games. One of those games was 20 minutes. One of those games was 17. Still going to be limited, of course, and at some point that's going to eat into the minutes for Zizic, but Zizic has been playing really, really well recently. I still think he's perfectly fine in cash, especially in the spot where Washington does really struggle to defend opposing big men. They're getting pounded on the boards. They're giving up 48 rebounds per game, 50.2 points in the paint, and 14.6 second chance points. I have some interest in Ante Zizic in this spot here tonight. Definitely someone that I would consider in cash and tournaments. Moving on to Milwaukee at Detroit. Milwaukee 6-point favorites in this one, a 218.5 over under. Ish Smith is out. Dante DiVincenzo is questionable. Henry Ellenson questionable. Reggie Bullock doubtful, and Malcolm Brogdon is probable for this game. Looking at the Detroit side of things, the Pistons have been absolutely putrid recently, but it hasn't been because of Blake Griffin. Blake Griffin, 29% usage rate on the season, averaging 33.5 points per game over his last 6 games. He's been doing his best to keep the Pistons in games. Unfortunately, the Pistons are terrible. I really like Blake Griffin in this spot. It's obviously not the greatest of matchups. Milwaukee, a really, really good defense. They protect the rim really well, but they rank 3rd in fantasy points allowed to opposing power forwards. 31% of his shots come in the paint or the mid-range, where we love to attack Milwaukee. Earlier in the season, they did struggle against post-ups, and that's something Blake Griffin is really good at doing. He's $9,300 on DraftKings, 10K on FanDuel, averaging 48.7 fantasy points per game against the Bucks this season. I have interest in him in all formats. Andre Drummond can be used in tournaments. He's just been putrid against this team, which is understandable, but again, he does have tournament upside. Reggie Bullock was someone that I was interested in before the news came out that he was going to be doubtful. Steady dose of minutes, steady dose of field goal attempts, generally speaking, going to get you about 20 plus fantasy points. Does shoot a lot of corner threes, and that's appealing in this matchup. If he gets upgraded to like questionable, or if he plays, I think he's perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. Looking at the rest of the guys, Reggie Jackson, way too cheap over on DraftKings at 4,800 to completely overlook. Despite the tough matchup, he has performed pretty well in this spot in the 3 meetings they've faced off against each other so far this season. Stanley Johnson, I think, is going to get the extended run here over Luke Kennard. That being said, Dwayne Casey has been rather unpredictable whenever it comes to either one of these guys. But Stanley Johnson, a better defender, and that has appeal in the spot because someone has to try to guard Giannis Antetokounmpo tonight, and Stanley Johnson, 2 games against the Bucks this season, has performed really, really well. He's a guy who can hit from the corners, and that is appealing again because Milwaukee really struggling to defend corner threes. On the Bucks side of things, you're obviously looking at Giannis, especially in a matchup against a Pistons team that really struggles to defend the rim. We like taking Giannis in matchups against teams that, well, can't defend the rim. The biggest downside is Milwaukee has been obliterating opponents recently outside of the OKC game. And sometimes his minutes a little bit limited, like the Orlando game where he only got 32, Memphis 22, Miami 25. But the last 3 games, the minutes have been really solid for him. Production's really been there. He's 10-7 on DraftKings. That's really appealing, especially in tournaments in this spot here tonight. Has struggled against, or not really struggled, just played limited minutes against the Pistons this season, averaging about 44 fantasy points. That's why I kind of have him just as a tournament option in this spot. I really like Malcolm Brogdon. As always, a guy who takes a decent amount of his shots at the rim, just continues to produce every single night. Started off really slow against OKC and Charlotte, and still got there both of those games. Eric Bledsoe is perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. More of a tournament option just because of his inconsistency, but the matchup is really strong here for tonight. Detroit really struggling to defend opposing point guards, ranking 27th in defensive efficiency to the position. Chris Middleton, someone that we can look at in tournaments as well. Brook Lopez, coming in at 5,600 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel, has been playing really well, getting a lot of blocks recently. He's torched Detroit historically. He's had his way with Andre Drummond, averaging just shy of 30 fantasy points in limited minutes, I might add, against the Pistons this season. I like him as a tournament option here tonight. Looking at OKC at Orlando. OKC 5-point favorites in this one, 221.5 over under. Oklahoma City side is pretty much the same as always. I do have to mention Russell Westbrook, who has just been insane, coming off another triple-double, his 3rd straight game with a triple-double. Continues to shoot really bad, shooting just 40% over his last 10 days, 30% from 3, shot 25% from the floor against Milwaukee, still put up 53 fantasy points. Against the Orlando Magic, he is definitely sold that I have interest in. That being said, it is Paul George who I do have interest in a little bit more. He comes in at 9,800 on DraftKings, 11-1 on FanDuel. That's the highest price I've seen on Paul George in quite some time, but he deserves it. He's averaging 31.4 points, shooting 54.3% from beyond the arc over his last 5 games. Getting you the defensive numbers as well, and that's really attractive here. Had 3 steals against Milwaukee, 5 against Portland. This is a spot where I love Paul George, especially on DraftKings, for a slight discount from Russell Westbrook. But he's a guy you plug in your lineup, you know most nights he's going to get you 45, 50 plus fantasy points. I really like him here tonight. Especially Orlando really struggling on the glass. That's an issue that's been there for him for quite a while. They're allowing 45.6 rebounds per game to opponents, so that helps raise his floor a little bit, as we've seen the last couple of games. Double-digit rebounds in those outings. Steven Adams has been really good recently. In the month of January, he's shooting 66.9% from the floor. We know the floor is going to be there for him most nights. We know the ceiling is also there for him, especially against a poor rebounding team in Orlando. I have a lot of interest in Steven Adams at 6,500 on DraftKings, 7,400 over on FanDuel. Jeremy Grant continues to be a really strong cash mid-range option. He comes in at 5,300 on DraftKings, 6,100 on FanDuel. Again, plenty of upside as we saw against Milwaukee. Those 5 blocks really appealing. But the rebounding floor should be there for him. Has not really been there for him recently, and that's somewhat discouraging. But I still think it's going to be there for him tonight with Orlando struggling on the glass. That being said, also something to keep in mind, 18% of his shots come from corners, where Orlando is allowing opponents to shoot 42% on the season, so that helps raise his floor a little bit as well. Terrence Ferguson, never going to be someone that projects extremely well, but someone that I don't want to overlook in this spot. Again, coming in at 3,700 on DraftKings, 4,500 on FanDuel. More of a DraftKings value here tonight. Has been really solid over the last few games. Just taking a look back at his last 10, he's topped 20 fantasy points in 7 of those games. That's pretty appealing. 61% of his shots come from 3. Orlando really struggling to defend the 3-point line. This is a spot where I think Terrence Ferguson could have some success. 30% of his shots are corner threes. High success shots for him, and with Orlando allowing 42% shooting on corners, I like Terrence Ferguson a little bit as a value. On the Orlando side of things, we have seen Oklahoma City really struggle against scoring wings. They've actually struggled on defense over the last 10 games. 4th worst defensive rating at 114.8 over that span. They've struggled to defend wings, ranking 27th in defensive efficiency to small forwards. opponents have connected on 40.3% of their 3-point attempts over the last 10 games. That puts Terrence Ross on my radar. That puts Evan Fournier on my radar. Jonathan Isaac on my radar as well. Isaac's volatility with minutes are a little bit concerning. His lack of involvement in the offense most nights is also a little bit concerning. The field goal attempts have been up for him recently, so I do think he's more of a tournament option. I'm going to focus more on Terrence Ross and Evan Fournier in the spot. Fournier coming in second on the team in usage at 22.1%. Ross third in usage at 21.9%. Ross has been the more consistent option, and that makes him more appealing over in cash games, coming at 5,100 on DraftKings, 5,600 on FanDuel. But Fournier, 5,500 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel, a little bit more of an attractive tournament option in this spot. Looking at Nikola Vucevic, obviously it's not a great spot matching up against Steven Adams. He does lead the team in usage at 27.3%. OKC against big men over the last 10 games, 27th in defensive efficiency, 9,500 for Nikola Vucevic on DraftKings, 10-2 on FanDuel. The offensive involvement, the consistency that he's provided, even in tough matchups, most of the season is somewhat appealing. I like him in tournaments, not someone that I'm going to be looking at in cash games here tonight. Moving on to Chicago at Brooklyn. Brooklyn, 7-point favorites in this one, 217 over under. It is a back-to-back for Brooklyn, so that's something to be cognizant of. Wendell Carter Jr., Jared Dudley, Danzan Musa, Alan Crabb all out, Karis LeVert also out, and Treveon Graham is questionable for this game. D'Angelo Russell has topped 20 points 10 times in his last 13 games. He has 8 straight contests with at least 2 3-pointers, going 35 for 75 over the last 8 games from beyond the arc. This is the third time we've seen these teams face off tonight. This will be the third time we've seen these teams face off. Chris Dunn is in a pretty good spot here. I still mostly like the Bulls in tournaments because, well, Jim Boylan is a moron. Jim Boylan screws with rotations, and this team is terrible, and that really screws up their floor. But Chris Dunn, I think, can have some success here. Brooklyn has been getting torched in both the paint and mid-range, allowing 43.6% shooting and 42.7% shooting, respectively, in those areas. And that's where Chris Dunn does most of his offensive damage. Looking at his shot profile, Chris Dunn, 58% of his shots come in the paint or the mid-range, and we've actually seen him have some success in this spot against the Nets, averaging 37.5 fantasy points just in 2 games against Brooklyn so far this season. Again, a little bit of a volatile offense, as we can see by just looking at his game log, but 3 of his last 4 games, over 30 fantasy points. That's somewhat appealing here. Looking at Zach LaVine, it's the same story as every single night. High usage guy. That's appealing. He has, a 29.7% usage rate over the last 10 games. But all he's doing is scoring. He's barely giving you anything else in any other category. He had the 12 rebounds against Cleveland that I do not ever expect to see out of Zach LaVine, like, ever again. Most nights he's going to get you 3 or 4. Most nights he's going to get you a couple of assists, maybe a steal or something, but he's going to have to hit his shots, and he's going to have to rely on scoring. And if he's not doing that, he doesn't have a ton of value. That being said, in tournaments, you can look at him. He's topped 40 fantasy points just once over his last 10 games, and that's, like, even when you factor in, like, the 12 rebound game, he still couldn't get to 40 fantasy points. Like, I can't with Zach LaVine anymore. Bobby Portis is the most interesting spot here tonight, but again, Jim Boylan, he's coming off in a putrid game. He played 19 minutes with 13.5 fantasy points against the Cavaliers in what was a really good matchup. He draws an even better matchup here tonight. Nets giving up 51.2 points in the paint, 14.2 second chance points, and he's absolutely crushed the Nets so far this season. I would prefer to see him in the starting lineup because I would feel a little bit more secure with his minutes there. But in the 2 games against the Nets this season, 30 fantasy points in just 21.6 minutes. So Bobby Portis is probably the most appealing option here. You can use Lauri Markkanen, respectable 25% usage rates and 1.04 fantasy points per minute when you take Hutchison and all these other people off the floor. Nets have been pretty solid against opposing power forwards this season. They rank 12th in defensive efficiency, but 37% of his shots come in the paint or mid-range, so he could have some scoring success here tonight. 6,600 over on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. Again, he's just been so inconsistent, and that's really, really unappealing whenever you're playing anyone from the Bulls. You'd like to see some consistency, and he's also really struggled in this matchup. Robin Lopez in play if he starts. We saw him start last game. That was more of a size thing for going up against Ante Zizic. 4K on DraftKings and 4K over on FanDuel. But if he gets a start against a Brooklyn team, obviously somewhat appealing here tonight. You can even look at Wayne Selden, who got the start at small forward, played really, really well, 38 minutes, 32 fantasy points. I'd like to see the minutes stay about that, right about that 34, 35 to consider him, but I'd say probably 20 plus fantasy points is a solid expectation for Wayne Selden, who is 4,200 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel. Looking at the net side of things, it is a back-to-back. There are some injuries. We did see Rondae Hollis-Jefferson play a boatload of minutes last night. So that's something we do need to keep in mind because, well, it's the Nets, it's Kenny Atkinson, and yeah, it's the Nets. D'Angelo Russell, Shabazz Napier, the guys that I'm primarily looking at here. Russell, 32% usage rate, 1.30 fantasy points per minute without Dinwiddie and all these other people off the floor. He is still a little bit too cheap, I think. 8,400 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. We know the production is going to be there for him most nights. Struggled a little bit against Boston, 24 minutes. Still put up 39 fantasy points. So when I say struggled, not really. Against Chicago, he has not been terribly great, averaging 32 fantasy points in 32 minutes. But this is a spot with, especially with no Spencer Dinwiddie. I have a lot of interest in D'Angelo Russell here. Chicago ranks 27th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards. They're giving up 38% shooting from beyond the arc. Russell taking 40% of his shots from three. Napier going to spend some time alongside Russell, going to spend some time in the second unit. I still have a lot of interest in Shabazz Napier, 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,100 on FanDuel, coming in as that kind of Spencer Dinwiddie role. We've seen a decent amount of minutes for him over the last couple of games. Production has been really, really solid for him. We know he can score. We know we can get the peripherals out of him, so I have a lot of interest in him as well. Joe Harris, my third favorite option here, just a consistent guy getting you 20-plus fantasy points most nights, and with Chicago really struggling to defend the three-point line, that's appealing for Harris, who one of the better three-point shooters this season. 50% of his shots come from beyond the arc. He has topped 20 fantasy points in 8 of his last 10 games. Obviously, that was prior to last night's game where he went 2 of 8 from the floor and only got 8 fantasy points. But again, Joe Harris, someone to definitely consider here. Jared Allen, probably my next favorite option. Chicago giving up the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing centers, allowing 47.4 rebounds. They rank 28th in defensive efficiency to the position. Jared Allen, 5,600 on DraftKings, 6,800 on FanDuel. More of a tournament option, again, seeding some minutes, some nights to Ed Davis, and that's a little bit concerning. But the matchup, if he can get you 26, 28 minutes, is really appealing in the spot. The aforementioned Ed Davis at 4,100 continues to play out of his mind, continues to be a rebounding beast. Even if he's only getting you 20 minutes, 21 minutes in this matchup, I think he can definitely go off. I have interest in Ed Davis at just 4,100. As far as Rodions Kurucs and Damari Carroll, Rondae Hollis-Jefferson, I'm going to need somebody to be out tonight before I heavily consider any of these guys. Rondae Hollis-Jefferson would be the closest thing to someone that I would consider in this spot, assuming he's not going to be limited or anything like that here tonight. He would be the guy that I would consider the most over Corix Carroll, but I would like to see that somebody is out like Travion Graham or something like that before I consider him. Moving on, New Orleans Pelicans at Houston. Houston 9.5-point favorites in this one, 234.5 over under. Davis out, Etuan Moore out, Nikola Mirotic out, Julius Randle questionable, Clint Capella is out. Short-handed Pelicans obviously offer some upside. Rockets 113.3 defensive rating over the last 10 games. This is an appealing spot here. Whenever you take Mirotic, Moore, and Davis off the floor, Jrue Holiday 30% usage rate, 1.53 fantasy points per minute. Julius Randle 31.4% usage rate, 1.39 fantasy points per minute. Jahlil Okafor 22.5% usage rate, 1.10 fantasy points per minute. Those are the guys that I'm looking at primarily because, well, all the offense and all the scoring and all the rebounding is going to come from pretty much those guys. That being said, it is important to monitor the status of Julius Randle. If he misses, Jrue Holiday's numbers 1.81 fantasy points per minute. Jahlil Okafor 1.29 fantasy points per minute. I think Randle suits up. That being said, of course, keep an eye on the news. Jrue Holiday, regardless of Julius Randle's status, someone that I have a lot of interest in as a core option. 8,600 on DraftKings, 9,500 over on FanDuel. Again, I don't know why I clicked James Harden. He's your guy, 40 plus fantasy points just about every single night. Safe floor, safe scoring floor. Lots and lots of potential here tonight for Jrue Holiday. Absolutely love him. He's going to be someone that I'm going to try to force into my lineups as just a safe option against the Rockets. The Rockets have been killed on the glass since Clint Capella went down. 51.7 rebounds per game over their last 7 games. That makes Jahlil Okafor someone that I absolutely love here tonight. Price is coming up there, obviously. 6,100 over on DraftKings, 7,200 on FanDuel. He's just been playing so freaking well. Over 40 fantasy points in 3 of the last 4. The Oklahoma City game where he played 25 minutes. Still put up 18 points, 8 rebounds. This is a spot where Jahlil Okafor should feast. He's going to be someone that I'm going to be trying to get in my lineups here tonight. Rockets getting killed in the paint as well, and that's a pretty big boost for Jahlil Okafor. They're giving up 67.7% shooting at the rim. Again, Okafor, 71% of his shots coming at the rim, 25% in the paint. So have no concerns about him producing in this spot. The same for Julius Randle, who leads the team in points in the paint at over 13-point game per game. I would like to hear that he's not going to be limited before I force him into my lineups, but we know Julius Randle, the guy that you definitely want to get some exposure to whenever Anthony Davis is out. And at 7,800 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel, way too cheap. He's already been really, really good against the Rockets in 2 previous games. Darius Miller is just a minutes play at this point. I don't expect to see the 36 fantasy points out of him that we saw against OKC, especially if Julius Randle plays. But for the most part, the minutes are going to be there for him, and that's appealing in cash games. But that's about it. Elfrid Payton, someone that I really, really want to look at in cash or in tournaments if Julius Randle plays. 1.04 fantasy points per minute. The lack of rim protection for Houston is really appealing. Again, 67.7% allowed at the rim, field goal percentage allowed at the rim, where Elfrid Payton takes 59% of his shots. If Julius Randle sits, he would be one of the top mid-range options on the entire slate. I would even use him in cash, but I still have a lot of interest in him. The biggest downside is sometimes he's not closing games, and that's, well, problematic. But we saw the upside against Oklahoma City. That was without Julius Randle in the lineup. We've seen him crush in the spot earlier this season, putting up a 10, 10, and 10 triple-double. I have interest in him in tournaments. On the flip side of this, Chris Paul back in the fold, not expected to play a ton of minutes, going to be limited in the mid-20s. I don't care what Fantasy Labs and other people are projecting him for. He's going to play in the mid-20s. Mike D'Antoni said he's going to play in the mid-20s against the Pelicans, and then he's going to ramp him up to about 30 minutes after that. So Fantasy Labs is wrong with their tweet that came out yesterday. James Harden still a top tier option here, even with Chris Paul back in the fold. We saw him drop 70 plus. We saw him drop 70 fantasy points last game. Pelicans ranked 21st in defensive efficiency to opposing backcourts. They're allowing 37% 3-point shooting. So ignoring him, even at his price tag, 13.6 on DraftKings, 13.9 on FanDuel, probably a little bit of a mistake. Again, lots of upside in a fast-paced game. I wouldn't force him into my lineups, but if you wanted to start building around him, it certainly makes sense if value opens up. When sharing the floor with Chris Paul this season and with Clint Capella out, he still has a 45% usage rate, 1.69 fantasy points per minute. So that production's still there, usage is still there. For any of you saying Chris Paul effect or anything like that, you're a bunch of morons. Eric Gordon, still going to play a lot of minutes here. Got the start at the small forward position. Still going to take a lot of shots, and it is a revenge game for Eric Gordon. It's also a revenge game for Chris Paul, Austin Rivers. But Eric Gordon coming in at $5K on DraftKings, $5,500 on FanDuel. Really appealing in the spot. We know the Pelicans struggle to defend the three-point line, but Pelicans also really struggle against small forwards. They rank 30th in defensive efficiency to the position. I have interest in Eric Gordon here tonight. Again, 5K. The minutes are still going to be there for him. He just has to hit the shots, but he was solid against the Magic. It's a pretty good spot for him. So even in limited minutes this season against the Pelicans, he still paid off his salary. Looking at Kenneth, FARIED, PJ Tucker. Tucker's fine in cash in tournaments. The Pelicans really struggling to defend corner threes. They're allowing opponents to shoot 42% on corner threes. 51% of his shots are from the corners. We know the minutes are going to be there for him. Production going to be up and down, but this is a spot where I have interest in PJ Tucker. And then Kenneth FARIED, manimal, doing what I expected him to do whenever he came to Houston. Gonna pull down double-digit rebounds most nights. Gonna put up a lot of points. Gonna put up numbers. Pelicans allowing 49 rebounds per game over the last 5 games without Anthony Davis. Kenneth FARIED, someone that I have a ton of interest in here tonight. Moving on, Phoenix at San Antonio. Last 2 games of the night. San Antonio 13-point favorites in this one, 220.5 over under. TJ Warren is out. DeMar DeRozan is out. DeAndre Ayton is doubtful for this game. Obviously some blowout risk, but if you're in my Discord or you followed me on Twitter or whatever for quite some time, I think you're making a big mistake if you factor blowout risk into your lineup construction, because, well, oftentimes it still doesn't work out for you. I have a lot of interest in Devin Booker here. Clearly the top option, averaging 1.24 fantasy points per minute, 36% usage rate whenever you take Ayton, Warren, and a bunch of these other guys off the floor. Obviously the top option from the Phoenix side of this game, averaging 27.7 points over his last 3 games. Matchup, if you look at it from a shooting guard perspective, is not that appealing. That being said, if you look at him as a point guard, which he is basically the de facto point guard, Spurs ranking 24th in defensive efficiency to opposing point guards this season. If you're fading Devin Booker, I think Kelly Oubre is definitely the right way to go. He's been excellent for the Suns with Warren going down. He does average a 28% usage rate, 1.05 fantasy points per minute off of the bench. He's going to stay off of the bench, and that's completely fine. 50% of his shots come at either the rim or as corner threes. Spurs have really struggled to defend those 2 areas over the last 10 games. He's been really solid. Did have a little bit of a down game against Denver, but at 5,700, even 24, 25 fantasy points, not going to kill you most nights. He's the guy I have the most interest in if I'm fading Devin Booker in the spot, which at this point it comes down to Jrue Holiday or Devin Booker for me. I'm going to go Jrue Holiday 8 out of 10 times. Kelly Oubre 6,300 on FanDuel, also a really strong option here tonight. Outside of that, you can look at Josh Jackson. He's perfectly fine in cash and tournaments. 5,300 on DraftKings, 5,800 on FanDuel. Not really someone that I really prefer to force into my lineups, but again, he's been a little bit up and down, but over 20 fantasy points in those 5 straight games. Hasn't been putrid against the Spurs. it's just a spot where like I would rather go with Kelly Oubre here or Rashawn Holmes, 4,700 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. Got to get the start again. Started the second half over Dragon Bender, 1.19 fantasy points per minute with 8 and off the floor. Rebounding potential production's going to be there for him. Really not a whole lot to say. The matchup not ideal, but Rashawn Holmes going to play 30 plus minutes here tonight easily. Should absolutely feast. So I love Rashawn Holmes in all formats. Not going to go back to the Elie Okobo route. We saw what happened with him last time out where he just didn't get the minutes because, well, there's not a whole lot to really like about him or his game. On the Spurs side of things, it starts with LaMarcus Aldridge, 36.4% usage rate, 1.54 fantasy points per minute. I'm just going to force him into my lineups. I know he struggled against the Suns in limited minutes this season. I know there's blowout risk, but that usage and production just way too high to overlook. He's been really, really good, shouldering the bulk of the offensive load with DeMar DeRozan out, has scored 25 or more points in 4 of the past 5 games. So, yeah, he's been really good recently. Outside of Aldridge, I really like Rudy Gay. 27.8% usage rate, 1.26 fantasy points per minute. I'm going to have 100% exposure to one of LaMarcus Aldridge or Rudy Gay. If you're building 20 lineups, I would still have 100% exposure to one of those two guys. You can pair them together in a handful of lineups if you want, but I would definitely have, again, 100% exposure to either Aldridge or Rudy Gay here tonight. Marco Bellinelli, a really strong option, has top 20 fantasy points in 8 of the last 10 games. Takes 50% of his shots from 3, where the Suns have a lot of opponents to shoot, 36.4% this season. He's also someone at 25% usage rate, 0.95 fantasy points per minute with DeRozan off the floor. Patty Mills has been a little bit up and down, but in a 459-minute sample size with no DeRozan, 22.6% usage rate, 0.98 fantasy points per minute. I think Derrick White and Bryn Forbes are going to be chalky point guard options just because of their price tag and the matchup. And if you're building tournament lineups, I think Patty Mills makes for a pretty strong tournament pivot off of those guys. But I'm still going to go Bryn Forbes, Derrick White, and Cash just because of their in the starting lineup and their roles in this offense are really, really good. Derrick White averaging 14.3 points per game over his past 3 games. Really, really good spot here for him. Bryn Forbes, 8 of 13 from 3-point range against the Suns this season. Again, both guys really, really good options here. I'm going to go White. I prefer White because of the way he can stuff the stat sheet again. Consistency is there for him. Has been solid against the Suns in 2 games this season. Again, just a guy most nights 25, 26, 27 fantasy points, upwards of 29, 30 sometimes. And then Bryn Forbes, a little bit more inconsistent lately, a little bit up and down, but scoring potential in this spot here tonight. So I like Bryn Forbes a little bit less than Derrick White. Don't overlook Pau Gasol, Davis Bertans, guys that could definitely get there, even playing limited minutes. We saw Davis Bertans. Really, really strong game against Washington. Plenty of upside here. If he gets the minutes, should get the minutes in the mid-20s. Gonna get you 20-plus fantasy points most nights. Just looking at his game log, you can see pretty consistently since DeRozan went down, getting you there. And then Pau Gasol. Don't know that minutes are really going to be there for him, but he has started the last couple of games. Did start against the Pelicans and had a really, really strong game. If he starts and he's playing really well, he's going to get a little bit of a run, and we've seen him the one time he faced this team earlier this season, 30.8 fantasy points in just 16 minutes. So there is upside at Pau Gasol. I do like him at 3,100 on DraftKings and 3,500 on FanDuel. On to the last game of the night, Philly at LA. Philly 6.5 point favorites in this one, 229.5 over under. LeBron James is doubtful. Kyle Kuzma, Josh Hart, Jonah Bolden, all questionable. Markelle Fultz and Lonzo Ball out for this game. Joel Embiid expected to suit up, and Joel Embiid at 10-2 against the Lakers as well. Yeah, that's pretty damn sexy. I have a lot of interest in Joel Embiid, even 11-6 on FanDuel. Going to be someone that I would love to force into my lineups. This is a smash spot here for Joel Embiid. Um, Lakers almost 60 fantasy points per game given up to opposing centers, 47.2 rebounds, 14.1 second chance points, 50 points in the paint. Tyson Chandler, Ivica Zubac, JaVale McGee, none of these guys are going to be able to stop Joel Embiid. He should just absolutely feast here tonight. JJ Redick, my second favorite option here. Most nights, again, your cash game lock most nights, just because he's going to get you 25, 26 with maybe even 30 fantasy points. But against the Lakers, who rank 28th in defensive efficiency to opposing shooting guards, they've allowed 38% 3-point shooting. It's pretty appealing for JJ Redick here tonight. Don't overlook TJ McConnell as a value option in a fast-paced game. He could definitely get you there. He is 3,800 on DraftKings, 4,400 on FanDuel. I don't really have a lot of interest in the rest of the guys, the Wilson Chandlers, Ben Simmons, Jimmy Butlers. I guess Chandler at 3,800 on DraftKings is somewhat appealing, but he sucks and doesn't do anything most nights. And, well, yeah, it's Wilson Chandler. You're going to get these nights where he plays 34 minutes and gets you, like, less than 20 fantasy points. And then, again, with Butler, just GPPs. Ben Simmons does have triple-double upside most nights, but the Lakers really good rim protection team that definitely hurts his upside. So again, just a GPP option, but not someone I'm heavily considering. On the LA side of things, we really need the status of Kyle Kuzma and Josh Hart ahead of time to be too confident in much of anything from this side of the game. That being said, RAJON Rondo, 18.1% usage rate, 1.19 fantasy points per minute. Brandon Ingram, someone that I do have interest in here, 26.9% usage rate, 1.11 fantasy points per minute when you take LeBron and Lonzo off the floor. Rajon Rondo, 6,700 over on DraftKings. We know the minutes are going to be there for him. That's for damn sure. Production is most nights going to be there for him as well. He is 6,900 on FanDuel. I don't hate the play here for Rajon Rondo. Going to play a bunch of minutes. Philly has not been great against opposing point guards for a lot of this, well, basically since Jimmy Butler came to town. Outside of that, the Sixers over the last 10 games, 63.6% shooting at the rim, 38.5% shooting from the three-point line. 70% of Rondo's shots come in those two areas. Again, Brandon Ingram, a guy largely independent of Kyle Kuzma's status here tonight. He does see a 2.7% increase without Kyle Kuzma on the floor, 2.7% usage increase, and that equates to about a plus 8.45 fantasy point per minute boost, per 36-minute boost. That being said, even if Kuzma suits up, Ingram still, again, as I mentioned, 26.9% usage rate, 1.11 fantasy points per minute. He's somewhat appealing here, again, someone that takes a lot of shots at the rim, so could have some success here tonight. If Kyle Kuzma plays, he would be an intriguing tournament option. 21st in defensive efficiency, two opposing power forwards are what the Sixers rank this season. That being said, he does really struggle with Rajon Rondo on the floor. If Kyle Kuzma sits, you're looking at Michael Beasley, KCP. The same if Josh Hart sits, you're still looking at KCP. Even Lance Stevenson as guys that we could definitely consider in this spot. If Kuzma sits, your KCP plus 7.99 fantasy points per 36 minutes. So he would definitely be someone to consider in this spot if Kyle Kuzma misses this game. Hopefully we get a little bit of an indication sometime throughout the afternoon. Luke Walton did say he is hopeful that Kuzma can play. I'm not going to be on the Ivica Zubac train. I know he's been really good recently, coming at 5,600 on DraftKings, 5,800 on FanDuel. But going up against Joel Embiid, yeah, not somewhere I really want to target Zubac. But if you're looking in tournaments, I guess he makes for an okay tournament option. Again, as I mentioned earlier, not 100% certain what the recording schedule is going to look like the rest of the week. So yeah, hopefully I'll be back tomorrow. We'll just have to take a wait and see approach. But good luck in all your contests tonight.